Assalamualaikum. Good morning to all. Welcome to the Malaysian Pavilion. So I'd like to begin today's conversation with the notion that nature is an asset. And one of the key objectives of finance is to enhance and preserve and protect the value of assets. But unlike produced capital, which has doubled over the last 30 years, natural capital has declined by 40% during the same period without many of us even realizing. Because unlike other forms of assets, nature tend to be silent, they tend to be invisible, and it's also mobile. So reading up a little bit on the economics of biodiversity and drawing parallels with how Islam or Sharia views environmental soundness, I see very strong alignment in terms of the fundamental notion. Environment is given to mankind as a service, but it comes with a duty for us to protect, conserve, and restore. So today, joining me are four esteemed panel to talk about how do we optimize Islamic finance to be able to create a more balanced ecological system and help preserve the stability of the financial system. So to begin the conversation, if I may I invite each of the panel speakers to share your situational assessment of how Islamic finance have contributed to the green agenda and to sustainable economic growth. If I may begin with you, Tan Sri Azman.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Governor, fellow panelists, Puan Liza, thank you for inviting. So I think we're going to get 2 or 3 rounds. So we're going to split this out a bit. And it's great that Governor quoted Surah Al-A'raf, ayat 56, famous verse, do not cause corruption,
do not corrupt the earth,
do not corrupt
as it has been set right.
Once it's been set right. I think that's a good starting point. So philosophically, my understanding, and last night I couldn't sleep, I arrived a bit late. So I read this book. It didn't put me to sleep. So this morning when I arrived, tengok moderator pun ada buku ni. So this is published by INSEAF, so a shout out for INSEAF, sponsored by Maybank. So the Maybank reps here, thank you. And Yusof Qadawi. About 20 years ago, the great Sheikh Al-Mahrum was asked to speak about environment, Islam and environment. And he said one speech is not enough. It ended in the book, consider. Jadi let's start with the premise that we are Khalifah, we are vicegerent, ayat Khalifah, because we are stewards of the environment. First point. Second point then, what is the link between environment and finance? Maybe I want to get this out of the way. Inside here, there's a beautiful passage describing a treatise on zakat and what it means to environment at the philosophical level. I just want to share with you. I'm blown away by this. Because the earth and all that is on it, all of creation actually, it receives and it gives. So if you think of the earth, it receives rain, it also gives out nutrients and become trees. Trees pula receive that thing from the earth, but it gives out oxygen, and so on. So the ecosystem actually is a system that gives and receives. That's why zakat is important, or not just important, wajib is because of that. It says actually that we receive, those who are blessed, therefore we have to give. So you see the link. Then further than that, Iza started with nature declining. I've learned that nature and nature-based solution is powerful. You know why? Nature has the ability to heal. Rivers that are dead can come alive again. This has happened many times, many places. And therefore, this gives a possibility. I do worry, Governor, in the case of finance, especially with the escalation of debt, it doesn't. In history, those who study debt, there was a Yale professor who passed away, tak ingat nama dia. He wrote a 5,000-year history of debt. And then there's Michael Hudson, who writes a lot about debt jubilees. In the old days, there are debt jubilees, whereby when debt reaches a certain level, the ruler, the sovereign, will then do debt jubilees, basically debt forgiveness, to reset the system. But bear that in mind, finance goes on this path, which is the creation of man tadi. Because what's driving a lot of the unsustainability is really around overconsumption, as you know, and capital cannot find its way to go and finance projects that help with both sustainability of the environment and sustainability of society. Two things, planet, people. Maybe I'll stop there. There's a lot of issues. So I think we're already doing stuff, but I think we're just, one, scratching the surface. Number two, we got to think deeper. We got to go further. And we actually have a very rich tradition, which is all-encompassing, shumul, and so on and so forth, which I'm sure Tan Sri Daud and my colleagues here at SC has just issued the guidelines on Maqasid al-Shari'ah. You know, I took the invitation to chair the Islamic MIFC Leadership Council to try and bring and drive so that this effort is not just top-down from the bank and SC, but also the industry. As many of you know in this room, we've got stuff lined up, inshallah, which I'll cover in the next round. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tan Sri. It's actually very interesting, Tan Sri, when you talk about nature having the ability to heal, whereas finance have the tendency to overproduce and overconsume. I wonder, Tan Sri Daud, whether you would want to weigh in on your situational assessment of Islamic finance and how do you view the contribution? Has it been meaningful?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Honorable Governor, panelists, and distinguished audience. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to all of you. I think if I were to be a diplomatic, I can have one version of the answer. But if I can be a bit open, blunt, and frank, I have another version of the response to this question. It's up to you now, whether I should be open or I should be a bit diplomatic. Or can do both.
For those who know me well, I'm always on for the candid answer.
I think we have a major problem within our Islamic community. When I say about Islamic community, I'm not referring to any geography of the planet, but the overall Muslim geographies of the world. The sentiment towards environment, biodiversity, nature, water protection, the whole ecosystem to sustain the food chain to be there all the time, from the cattle, from the water, all the way to human protein and whatnot. I would say the level of understanding and appreciation is very, very low. Particularly when we talk about countries which are blessed with so many gifted resources of economy. Unlike some countries which are struggling to find the food on the table. So this is my observation around the globe. Whereas in our classical literature of the Quran and the Hadith, as Tan Sri Azman was rightly hinting to those points, plenty of them, is very clear-cut that preservation of life is the most important maqasid al-Sharia. But preservation of life is not about killing and murder or avoiding killing and murder, but also to ensure the whole ecosystem of plantation, farming, the quality of water, the quality of genome, the production per acre and what have you. So this is the whole aspect of it. The population is increasing of the world, of course, but the land supply is decreasing, and of course the plantation is equally decreasing. So we have this challenge: how can we use Islamic finance to make good or to make it repairable when we can do something within our control? If we miss this particular era of the time, I think we have to be suffering forever. It will become irreversible. Some countries, I mean, I don't want to mention the name of the country, big country of the world, they use excessive fertilizer to produce more production. After the few decades of the year, the land died. The land cannot produce anymore, and they have to buy plenty of land outside the country to sustain and guarantee food supply. In the Quran, it is clearly mentioned that the good land will produce good produce or product or harvesting products. But the bad land, وَالَّذِي خَبُسَ لا يخرج إلا نكدا. The bad, the corrupted land, over fertilizing, overheating, overwatering for the flood and whatnot, will not produce other than low quality or no quality whatsoever for human beings. So these are very powerful verses of the Quran to say that we have to stick to the balance. Fertilizing is very important, but not overutilize it. Overwatering or less, exposure to the right mineral of the land and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, if I may stop at this juncture, I think we need to work harder. We cannot shy to say that we are left behind, and we have to double our job. Perhaps Malaysia, perhaps Indonesia, perhaps some countries, they are very ahead of, this narrative. But many countries are still struggling even to acknowledge that environment is part of Islam. The nature is part of Islam. So we need to put a lot of effort. What more to put the robust and the sustainable financial products into the place. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. It's interesting that you mentioned preservation of life, and there is this debate going at COP this year about how do we really measure climate change and its effects, whether it's just in terms of the increase of temperature, or actually we should be looking at lives lost. So I saw when, Tan Sri, you were speaking about preservation of life, Dr. Hiller, you were noting, I wonder whether you would want to comment from a global perspective, particularly that IFSB has a worldview on the Islamic nations.
Yes, thank you so much. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the Malaysia Pavilion for having the Islamic Development Bank here. Thank you to the Governor for opening, and also more generally to Malaysia for your leadership on this, in this area. So thank you so much. For those not familiar, the Islamic Development Bank is a multilateral development bank, so similar in that sense to the World Bank or Asian Development Bank. We support 57 member countries around the globe. Sorry. We support 57 member countries around the globe, and we're the world's largest South-South Islamic development institution. Today I'd like to share some examples of what we're doing in the knowledge sphere and also around innovative finance, if that's okay, in support of some of these goals. So firstly, last year at COP27, we launched a joint report with the Asian Development Bank on unlocking Islamic finance for climate action. And this was a very important report, and I can share this with colleagues afterwards. And I think in this report, we found that Islamic climate finance, for example, constitutes less than 2% of the Islamic finance service industry overall. So there's a lot of room for improvement. But what we also did in that report was to map different Islamic financing modalities, some of which are successful and some which we think we can support to take forward. At MENA Climate Week, just a couple of weeks ago, we also launched a report called Islamic Banking for Climate Action, which was a collaborative effort done with the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative, SABAFI, which is the General Council for Islamic Banks and Finance Institutions, and also our own Islamic Development Bank Research Institute. So this had 5 pillars to support banks to become more active in the climate sphere. And this was structured around climate leadership, strategic climate management, collaboration and exchange of climate resilience, climate performance and accounting, and climate-related operational management. So we see here, you have to start at the strategic level, but then end up at the operational level. Also, under the India T20 or G20 leadership, we produced a T20 paper looking at sort of strategically how Islamic climate finance could be supported and enhanced. And so we had some ideas here, which I'm happy to share as well. And then also on the 6th of December here at COP28, we're launching a joint knowledge product with the UNDP on takaful for climate resilience. Now this effort came out of COP27 last year because we realised that this is a space, for example, where we could support smallholders and others in building their resilience to increasing climate challenges. I'll finish with some instruments that we're putting in place. We've mentioned green sukuk. But Islamic Development Bank has a sustainable financing framework, which we launched in 2019, and this supports the issuance of green and sustainability sukuk. And to date, we've issued over $5 billion in this area. So this is sort of at scale. And again, this was recognised in the joint report with ADB as an area that's doing well, but can also be scaled up. Finally, we're looking at green Islamic microfinance as an area that we think could be helpful for some of our member countries. We're also working with philanthropic groups such as the Gates Foundation and other philanthropic groups in the MENA region on something called the Lives and Livelihoods Fund, which has just received its second tranche and which increasingly focuses on climate change. And earlier this week, we launched a Just Transition Conceptual Framework and Action Plan. I know the Governor referred to Just Transition, to help again support over the next couple of years. So I'll stop there. There's a lot happening, but lots more to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hiller. Lots of action on the Islamic Development Bank's end, and I'm sure people in the audience would be eager to actually find out a little bit more. But speaking about translating strategy into action, if I can turn to Haniza, you've been at the forefront at Securities Commission to really develop that strategy aspiration and mobilize the players to translate that strategy into action. What's your situational assessment of Islamic finance contribution to climate action?
Thank you, Iza. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you to the organizers, Governor, for having me up here. I need to start by giving recognition to the two icons next to me. It is humbling to sit between two gentlemen, not excluding you really, but these two gentlemen have played a very significant part of my life, leading, becoming stewards, you know, in the Sharia committees and the leadership. So I am definitely not sure whether I can do justice. But number two, I think yesterday I was also up here, but it was from a different perspective. It was ESG aligned. So it covered a little bit more from a conventional perspective rather than Islamic. So I'm mindful that some of you may have heard some of the things I'm about to say today. Hopefully it's from a different angle. But I think, Iza, I think what I shared yesterday, I will underline and underscore it again today. I think for the capital market in Malaysia, Securities Commission, we have a dual role. We regulate and we develop. And that, I think, drives the approach that we undertake our initiatives. And I think, SC, I think in developing that sustainable finance intermediation, we realized that of course, the demand for and awareness on the needs for financing and investments has grown substantially over the years. But, and we, I think, as a global leader, have recognized for quite a while that there are inherent commonalities in both Islamic finance and sustainability. But it was, I think, in addressing this unique convergence, I think we say, that we are able then to introduce several initiatives that straddles both ecosystem, both from a developmental and regulator perspective. But I think we took that proactive journey, and this is where I must say we were probably ahead of the curve. And thank you, Governor, for also sharing some of the development. We came up with SRI, Sustainable Responsible Investment Sukuk framework way back in 2014, when conversations was just about to start. And since then, I think if you look at on the screens to your left here, or to your left here, you will see that framework has enabled to date close to US $4+ billion. And when we started out, it was merely green. It started to grow into our renewable energy. And now, and I think I will have to say that it has covered quite a few sectors. And we cannot speak about SRI Sukuk framework without doing justice to the social Sukuk for education and trust schools, which was led by Khazanah then in 2015 that came out. I mean, it was all part of that whole ecosystem. So that journey, I think, for sustainability and Islamic finance has started way back. And along the way, I think we also realized that as we came up with interventions, regulatory interventions, impact-wise, we also realized that there was probably needs for strategic guidance for the ecosystem, for the players. So there was also an issuance of a roadmap in 2019. And that roadmap basically underlined the fact that for Islamic finance, Islamic capital market and sustainability to grow, they needed to be at least a 5-pronged strategy. We needed to see more instruments. We needed to see more diverse participants in the players. And like everything else today, we spoke about it even then, there needs to be transparency and data availability. So those elements was put into place, and that also led that journey. And I think that assessment was, whilst we're all championing the green and the climate, and we also were mindful that the S was not to be forgotten. So I think as a regulator, that S part came really much into spotlight, especially during the pandemic. And then we realized, I think, Tan Sri, you spoke about zakat. I think for the capital market, we realized that there was a lot of potential in Awqaf. So Waqaf was an area that the capital market regulators tried to bring to the investment world. And usually we talk about big corporates in the investment world. But this is where I think as we looked into the pandemic impact and effects, we realized that the S was important. We introduced Waqaf into our capital market products, but also at the same time in our capital market master plan 3, we were focusing on pushing out the stakeholder economy focus. And that meant having solutions, interventions for that whole continuum of capital, which meant you would have the corporates being looked at, but you also had your MSMEs being looked at. We introduced equity crowdfunding, we introduced P2P, and that meant these small businesses, which actually form a large chunk of our economy, were also taken care of. And I think that's where the regulator has taken that journey for Islamic finance into the Islamic capital market. I will probably touch a bit on the maqasid later on if you ask, but I'm also going to be giving attribute to Tan Sri Dr. Daud for being very much behind that as we took that journey. Because sustainability, I think once we talk about commonalities, even PRI in their report, I think it was 2019, had highlighted that Islamic finance and sustainability was very much intertwined. But the rules of Sharia, I think it's not, and Tan Sri Dr. Daud actually said it just now, it's not just about looking after human, but it's also the environment. And that meant it covered, again, the whole spectrum. So Maqasid Sharia for capital markets, we took it from the angle of looking not only at necessities, but not only at the embellishments, but what was required by the markets. I'm going to stop there, Iza.
Thanks, Taniza. And you really spoke about building an ecosystem and the active role that the regulator has played. So I would like to switch gear a little bit into the market perspective on this particular subject. Tan Sri, as you know, for the longest time I've known you, you're definitely a leading scholar, but in my conversations with you, you're very much an entrepreneur and an innovator at heart. So if I can address the innovation opportunity question to you, what innovation opportunities do you see that the market players in the audience can actually participate and should actively take a role to capitalize on?
Thank you, Iza. I think if you allow me to speak something that I'm doing at the moment, to sing the song that I know of rather than to sing the song that I'm not familiar, like Warren Buffett was saying with regard to his investment style of investment. I think there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of products, a lot of financial engineering that we can do to support this sustainability and this green. In fact, in one of the lectures I have given at INSEAF, I have challenged the scholars for the first time. When we talk about sustainability, about green, perhaps we can take a pause for a while, pause and think. Don't ever bring Waqaf and Zakat in our discussion, because these are something divinely prescribed by the Quran and the Sharia. Try to look something beyond the Quran and Waqaf. because there are a lot more opportunities beyond wakaf and zakat. But somehow in our discussion, in our forum seminar, many seminars of the world, in the West, in the East, we try to start from wakaf and zakat and end with zakat and wakaf. Whereas social finance and sustainability should be beyond that, should be in terms of equity structure, in terms of big data, analytic and insights of the market, in terms of doing like P2P and reverse capital injection, debt convertible into what, and so on and so forth. So this is something we have to look much more serious moving forward. Of course, I take the risk of saying that because I'm not trying to undermine the Quranic prescription of zakat and wakaf, but I think for us in the modern time, variables have changed a lot. Zakat and wakaf are for Muslim and non-Muslim to some extent for wakaf, but social finance and this sustainability is new religion. It appeals to everyone, and that's why we need to address the issue from beyond the normal, boundary and bandwidth of Sharia definition, and that is a challenge. For example, I think I can share one or two. The hydrogen water technology, using the nanotechnology, can be used in the farming sector to produce more produce, make the fruit bigger, quicker in terms of production, and to make the aqua farming better, safer from all the diseases that aqua are faced with. And this is something that we have not looked into the, of course, when it comes to hydrogen, we can talk about power, which is another industry altogether. But when it comes to food security, the quality of hydrogen is good not only for men, because the oxygen will make us older, hydrogen will make us younger because it comes all the way to the blood system and remove whatever which is not healthy in our body. The same goes to chicken, cattle, plantation and whatnot. So this is something I'm doing at the moment using the Japanese technology. The second one, the last one, we are doing the digital remittance using the technology, and we are licensed by Central Bank of Malaysia, focusing on the unbankable people working in the camp, in the labor camp, in the plantation, in the construction site, and that allow them to be able to send the salaries away with the cheaper costs, and at any time according to the forex of their favor, of their interest, rather than being slave to the rate of the day, which they cannot come back to the city away from their labor camp or even the plantation hostel and whatnot. So this is something that we have to humanize the whole financial system. The more we speak, the more we can open up the mind. And from my perspective, either this kind of product, either this or that, or many other things in the market, we need to give more emphasis, more credential, more award. I need to say this openly. Perhaps we have to stop giving award to any product using zakat and wakaf. Because we wanted to challenge the mind, perhaps we have two awards. To be fair to the market. One is using the current, mindset in the Sharia perspective. The other one using something beyond Sharia perspective. If you look into the history of Islam, the wakaf and zakat are very small contribution. Of course, wakaf has been very great, but in between is a private contract that drives the whole, they call the third sector of the economy. So we have to go back and look into private contract that move the society, that creates balance. The word balance is very important. We cannot be, so much biased toward one direction over the other. I think this is something, perhaps, if I can, urge everyone to rethink, redesign, restructure, that we need to take this agenda seriously, but we need to free our mind to do more than wakaf and zakat. Otherwise, we're going to be trapped in our own trap that we have created in order to solve the humanity problem.
This breakthrough innovation, Tan Sri, that you spoke about, often when the market tries to implement it in the system, they encounter frictions. It can be costly, regulatory framework might not be ready. Hence, if I may turn the next question to Tan Sri Azman, you've always been advocating for finance to serve society and not to serve itself. And you spoke about widening the range of instruments so that the solutions are actually addressing contemporary problems at hand. But looking at the current global financial architecture, how do you think and what reforms necessary need to be implemented for us to be able to develop an environment that's much more conducive for a just transition?
Okay, I'm gonna try and speak even louder. Okay, Malaysia, boleh. Hey. Sorry. Which is actually a point I want to make. In our 66-year history, which is not very long, by the way, because my IC is 04, saya lahir Melaka, robohnya Kota Melaka was lost in 1511. So it's been 600 over years. In other words, as a independent country, kita baru about 10-12% lah in that journey. So for those who say, why is Islamic? Wait, hang on. And I totally, with my brother Tan Sri Daud, the richness of our Islamic heritage is not just Quran Hadith. In fact, Tan Sri, the scholars will tell you, kejumodan, that's the word, right? Jumud means the stagnation of the Islamic civilization is because we have forgotten how to innovate, how to look into the qiyas, into ijma, and other words, ijtihad. However, this is where me and Tan Sri Daud maybe slight stylistic. I don't think, I'm sure he did not mean it's either or. But if zakat wakaf is like a fig leaf to cover up, kita lupa buat tempat yang lain, then yes. But of course, we've got to do both. Because can I start with some statistics? Banking system, Governor, 2.5 trillion, lebih kurang. 44.5%, what Izzah tells me is Islamic lah. Capital market, 3.6 trillion, right? 64% Islamic. This part, good, but this tends to be one part. On the other hand, annual zakat collection now is about 5 billion, lebih kurang, 6. Ini trade secret, wilayah aja berapa kan? Wilayah Dawan, 1.2, and then Selangor, number 3, I shall not name, but never mind, we know kan? So in other words, and I'm told Wakaf land alone, according to a study from 10 years ago, I don't have the latest data, I'm trying to find, 1.2 trillion ringgit of undeveloped Wakaf land. So in other words, it's not either or. Both are required. In fact, there's more. So specifically, the thesis that finance is supposed to serve the real economy, which is supposed to serve society. There's a case to be made that this thing has inverted. Why? Because profit, financiers, the so-called financialization thesis. Tak apa. But as mentioned tadi, our Islamic finance, as Tan Sri Daud and others have said, the theory bagus, the practice a lot of gap. I think Bradley, you mentioned in your study 2% or something like that goes to climate finance. So this round, I got several quite specific stuff. Number one, Danny was my partner. We did a firm together called Bina Fikir. Danny, yeah? So you were Bina, I was Fikir, or the other way around, I cannot remember. We did both, we tried to do both, small firm. So they've announced the netter, as you call it, the panggil netter sekarang, with a lot of numbers, a lot of calculators, tak cukup, dia punya kosong tu kan. 1.2 trillion ringgit, if indeed half is need, we need to come up with product. On the other hand, I hear from your minister and YB Rafizi, 38,000 ringgit is on average what is required to put solar panels on an average terrace house kan. ROI should be good, tapi tak boleh. Somehow susah nak dapat. Come on, you bankers, this is the great opportunity of this century and maybe next century as well. Okay, whatever it is, under MLC, we are working together. This will be sneak preview lah. My council member here and governor there. This we propose to be one of the MIPs. a specific structure and product. I'm sitting down with your boss, by the way, Maybank, later this week, inshallah. We will launch this, that it definitely makes sense. The sukuks will be part of the solution. But I want to, which is then, I think the emission side, inshallah, we will come, when I say Malaysia boleh. Remember, 30 years ago, we needed public infrastructure, roads, airports, Putrajaya, macam-macam. Country came together. We mobilized savings, we created a sukuk market, you created a yield curve, etc., kan? Semua buat. We will do this again. We will do this again. We need to come together. But that's the emission side. The nature side, I'm a bit worried. Because, as you know, the E in ESG, people always talk about emission rather than environment. There's a big part which is actually nature. We are one of the most culturally diverse. The state of Perak, the state of Pahang is something we're working on together. I think we're going to need to come up with innovative products, including sukuk, to go and fund and use with Tan Sri Wahid and others the voluntary carbon market to create carbon credits to solve that, actually, to begin to solve that, to create templates. These are specifically mangroves, the Perak. These are specifically the central forest pine, the Perak as well. And then, as you know, the Tiger Reserve, our Tengku Makuta Pahang is here somewhere during this COP. Very committed, inshallah. Number 3, the development bank. So happened last week, I was at the 50th anniversary of Bank Bangunan. I didn't realize, as a group under Dafia governor, their firepower actually not that big. It's 50, 70 billion, depending how you count. And their cost of funds are actually higher than commercial banks by about 150 bips. This is beautiful ground for blended finance because some of these climate-related challenge are long-term gestation projects. That's why the state of Sarawak is able to do hydrogen, for example. So again, a solution that involves some form of that level of blended developmental finance will need to come in. Termasuk grants, termasuk, kind of policy lending and so on and so forth. For ITCAT, a beautiful framework platform that was created during COVID 3 years ago. I think the issue which we know is scale. Masih only about 40, 50 million. But I'm very encouraged. I see this at the micro level. If just now blended at the debt level, at the micro level, we can do stuff. Example, why don't we embed that environmental considerations dalam all the stuff yang kita nak, if not already. For example, I think the ITCAP platform has not just the power of blended finance. As you know, another part is really put the technical capabilities and the convening power to bring all the best minds and organizations together. So you embed that dalam. So orang nak buat, orang kampung ke nak buat agriculture small yang macam Tan Sri Daud cakap tadi. I happen to chair University Technology. We do a lot of stuff. We worry about how to reach to market, reach to society kan. Return on value, we call it. Jadi, for example, our water membrane project is world class. Our VC buat, dia menang macam-macam award. Now is under CSR. But surely this can be done to go to the full gamut of not just CSR, macam Tan Sri Daud kata. Kemudian, if we take, I already spoken a little bit about zakah, wakaf, maybe the risk capital in addition to ethical capital. I think a lot of those numbers, banking system dengan sukuk, are still, walaupun Islamic, is technically still under debt capital. We need to have more mudarabah, musyarakah structures, as you know. And in this regard, some of my former colleagues actually, 2 trillion, come on guys, we need to do more and channel this into impact funds that are of climate and nature based. The innovation that we did years ago on education, the first Sukuk Ehsan, it basically needed a few people in a room and say, we're going to do this, sat down and say, okay, these are the education objectives, this and that, kita buat. We did the step down dan sebagainya. Boleh buat. So Datuk Muazzam, I think under Tawanji, so we're going to do this, for example. And finally, maybe at the scholar level, we, if I may, and you heard, some of you heard this before, but the more I think about it, some of us had a conception of capital to be used for a stakeholder economy rather than just a shareholder economy. This 15, 20 years ago, it was a little bit lonely. Okay, at that time, the shareholder value movement was very high, right, up the list. But we define value di Khazanah, true value as financial, but also economic and societal value. And then we try to really put that into practice. In that regard, the SDG movement, which took over MDG, so SDG became ESG. As you know, there's a lot of pushback now. There's all these ESG wars going on. Why? Because SDG, ESG, banyak MSG, Governor. Sorry, pardon the pun. This audience tahu. Actually, even foreign audience, when I say MSG, they know what is MSG. Because now very global, kan? What is the G in MSG? From an Islamic finance standpoint, Tan Sri Daud, the G is gharar. Gharar, pasal dia uncertain, ambiguous, tak transparent, niat tak baik, PR je lebih. That's gharar, right? If you remove the G from MSG, what do you get? You get MS, maqasid syariah, yang you baru launch. So we have all the answers. The issue now is to turn theory into practice. And we're going to bring China into that as well because they're big. Okay, thank you very much.
Tan Sri has set the tone for Maqasid Syariah explanation by Puan Haniza. So I'm going to jump straight to you first. There's many frameworks, as you can see on the wall, that have been introduced by SC over the last couple of years. So perhaps, Haniza, you can share the policy underpinnings of these frameworks and the kind of use cases that have really led the industry to be able to solve some of the persistent problems that we see in the ecosystem.
Okay. I'm not going to deep dive into the Maqasid guidance immediately, but that's probably something I'm offering everyone to scan the QR code there, then probably you can take it and we can have a separate discussion because like I said, you know, it's a very deep topic. But I do want to just take a little bit of view on what Tan Sri Dr. Daud said just now about looking a little bit out of the normal areas. No doubt innovation, especially in the capital market, focus on traditional assets. It has always been that. And you talk about the sukuks and the equities. But I think that's where what has driven or the motivational DNA for that success has been the fact that it's innovation. That we took the SRI in the various forms, the Sukuk Ihsan, and in fact, when we did our transition linked Sukuk a couple of, last year actually, we announced, it's always been about innovating product, going strength to strength, but always focusing on traditional. Now we have introduced alternative assets. And this is where I think where Dr. Daud said, okay, well, let's not focus on zakat and wakaf. Take it a little bit further. Technology has no religion, right? So for the Islamic capital markets, what we did was we are now embedding that innovative ask to the players so that you can bring, whether it's traditional or whether it's alternative assets, but you're bringing it to the players, to the investors. And in fact, what we did for SC, we introduced an accelerator program, a regulator-led accelerator program that instead of just focusing on the E or and the S and the G, we actually created a vertical simply for S first. Solutions came in from all over the world. We had applications from Indonesia, Singapore, the US, and what you can see is that is now creating the dynamism in Islamic capital markets. So we have shifted. I think that's something that will be happening. And where Maqasid then came in was, okay, obviously we always talk about commonalities, right, between sustainability and Islamic finance. But what was the identity that we could give to it so that you can actually see where the rules that have been looking at it. I mean, if SDG came out, I think we've had this also talked about for a while, right? SDG came out 2014, 2015, where all these things came up, where else the elements in Maqasid existed more than 1,000 years, right, Tan Sri? So the importance given to the planet, the earth, the preservation of humankind, that was 1,000 years ago. So it's about putting a form to it, putting more substance into it. So what SC did was coming up with this guidance was, we also know that as we move in this sustainability agenda, instead of just asking what is being done, the next conversation is now, has it impact? And for it to have impact, we need measurements. We need to know what to measure, because otherwise we're all just going to be being very aspirational and not making it attainable. So Makasid spells out interpretations so that there's consistency in what you're putting into those elements. And whether it's contract-based, whatever product it is, it should have the elements of whether it has justice in it, whether there's humanity in it, whether there's accountability in it. The fiduciary duty is spelled out. The clarity is spelled out. And all that is spelled out in the principles and aspirations of Makasid. So what we did was we're trying to marry those two agendas, but giving it without losing the leadership. I think for Malaysia, I think that's where we've gone light years ahead in terms of innovation. So how does one keep it? We hope that's one of the tools.
Thanks, Saneza. We've covered a lot of ground this morning. We've still got a lot of ground to cover with 15 minutes left. So I'm now on the clock and the panel is on the clock. So before we actually wrap up, there are two areas that I do want to touch upon. One is the use cases from international perspective from IDB. Second is the MIFC Leadership Council and what the stakeholders can expect from MLC over the next 6 months. So perhaps first, whilst Tan Sri has issued a challenge to the audience, innovate beyond what's common, innovate beyond traditional finance and instruments. Do we see those use cases in some of the IDB experience?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll keep my responses quite brief. I think that Islamic climate finance has large opportunity for growth. I mentioned in the first response this 2% figure. This is despite knowing that Islamic financing and the modalities are very strongly aligned with climate investments. So I do think there's strong opportunity. So I think we need to work together to transition on this. And I think both enhancing modalities that are working well, such as Sukuk, as we talked about, and Zakat and things, but also expanding to Takaful and others where we see potential, as well as enhancing within the modalities that are already working. I think, secondly, in my first session, I talked a lot about knowledge products. So the next step, certainly from our side, is to transition the knowledge into action. And I think this applies to all of us. And for us, this is a combination as a development bank from both a multilateral development bank, sorry, is both a sustainable development perspective, from poverty alleviation and inclusivity and these sorts of things, but then also supporting the Paris Agreement and climate action as well. So these we need to bring together. And then lastly, I think that partnerships are key in this process. And in this sense, I talk about knowledge partners. I mentioned some of the ones that we work with in the knowledge products that we produce. Obviously for us, member countries, we have 57 member countries across the world. So we need to work with them, understand their needs, how we can support them better. And then also, as we've talked about, bring in other stakeholders. Now, this could be private capital through modalities such as Sukuk. Yesterday, we hosted a session on philanthropy and Islamic finance. So how do we bring the philanthropic sector more closely aligned here as well? So with the Islamic Development Bank, we have a specific modality, a vehicle, which is called the reverse linkage mechanism, which we use to share experiences from countries to others in need. And in this sense, as I began, sort of closing the loop, Malaysia is certainly a leader in this space. And I think there would be certainly countries that are member countries of ours who would be interested to learn some of these experiences. So I think these are some ideas that we can take forward. But certainly some of the information I've heard today, I look forward to following up and expanding. And just lastly, in terms of nature, this is an area that we also want to support. And next week, we will launch some common multilateral development bank principles on nature-positive finance. This is an emerging space. Obviously, it's one thing to talk about it, but how do you define it and how do you finance it and measure, as Sister said there as well. These are topics that are under discussion. So happy to follow up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Hiller. Tan Sri? MLC, what can the international community expect?
1 minute. Okay, about a year ago, roughly, the MIFC Leadership Council was formed. So the backdrop was basically we've had 40 years of Islamic finance, if you count Bank Islam's birth in 1983 as the start of Islamic banking. If you look at an institution like Lembaga Tabung Haji, for example, it's 60 years. So somewhat synonymous. And Alhamdulillah, I think during that 40 to 60 years, we have built what I would call a halal ecosystem. It's permissible. It's quite complete from Ar-Rahnu to macam-macam lah. Everything is there, VBI, etc. I think the challenge in the Islamic finance world, which of course links to all these other worlds, is how to transition from the good halal economy that we built, number one in the world and all that, to more than that, beyond that. A bit like a challenge that Tan Sri Daud posed. We've gone on the tagline how to move and taking a kias, an analogy from the food supply chain, which is to move from halal to tayyib. Actually, in the research that we've been doing, there are more than 80 references in the Quran of the word tayyib, and it's not just food, obviously, and the scholars here. So how to move from form to substance, actually. How to move from action to impact and authenticity. This is a challenge. That is not to say the 40, 60 years, but this was done under an incomplete system, banyak darurat, but also banyak masalah, the public good that we needed to carry. So that's the backdrop. So in that regard, we've been working on lots of engagement, and in the next 6 months, inshallah, you will see that we will announce, inshallah, with my council's permission later, and Bank Negara and SC, 10 what we call impact projects. I call it acupuncture. I'm a practitioner most of all. We will find the 10 acupuncture points. Some of you're already being roped in. The others, I will hypnotize, sorry, I will persuade you to come and join the battle. Ronnie, I'm seeing you at the back there. And I'm sure they want to participate. There's we feel that finance to really serve society must solve problems. What are our two biggest problems right now? We have a lot, but the two big buckets, one of it is sustainability, which we covered a lot today. The other is inequality, the issue of inclusivity, planet and people. In that regard, actually, I just want to make this point about the link between the two. The verse, or rather the exposition on zakat was one. I know the word planetary health. My sister, Tan Sri Jamila, is driving this. Work on planetary health, because ultimately this all interlinked and affects the well-being of the planet, affects the well-being of human beings. So both of them are, of course, interrelated. So the projects will spread across instruments, across, what do you call it, types lah. So termasuklah zakat, wakaf, sukuk, banking, ITCAD, blended finance, and so on, okay? Now, some of that I completely agree. In fact, ISDB talk about partnership. Some of that blended finance as a MDB, Multilateral Development Bank, with someone like Bank Pembangunan, for example, we can identify those projects. We should do it together, actually. You're looking for projects to do. They're looking for funds and projects. I think under the guidance and stewardship of Bank Negara, SC, etc., we will do it. So you can expect that. We will come knocking. I think some of the specifics I already spoke about just now. I must say I have a little bit of preference because Bank Negara and SC are already doing sukuk market ni semua ada. Tak payah kacau lah in a way. We can improve. For example, something as fundamental and actually as big carbon footprint, housing. I know 30 over years ago, we had something called the diminishing musyarakah, right? Sekarang dah tak ada, That means you have equity in your house when you borrow. Now dah tak ada because of Basel, etc. We need to innovate. That's one of the needles that need to undo that, to find another way to do it. Another way to do it. Because surely that's closer to justice, then people can have proper homes that are environmentally friendly, etc. Then we begin to solve that. But the bias is also on philanthropic capital, how we can channel and get that. It's not just the money, It's the technical thing and the convening power. For example, tadi kalau dalam ITCAD, we work together. I'm sure you have your environmental team and ITCAD team, etc., Governor, that they put this embed as part of the screening criteria to help them. And then we have to reach out, bring the Mardi people, the people with the knowledge, the universities, and that's where the convening power comes in. So this is what I hope to do. We will announce, inshallah, in the next 3 to 6 months. The rollout period is we have an overall 10-year time frame. So acupuncture over 10 tahun, inshallah. Thank you.
Thanks, Tan Sri. At the start of the plenary opening, I picked up this phrase, trying to try. And I think all of us in this room would agree that trying to try is just not good enough. So to end on an action-oriented note, less than 1 minute each for all of the panel speakers, could you put out what big idea would you want to see translate into action over the next 3 years? Can we start with you, Dr. Hila?
The first respondent has the least amount of time to think about the answer. I think for us, you know, we're taking an integrated approach, so we're trying to sort of build knowledge and capacity and action. I mentioned green Islamic microfinance, Takaful for climate resilience, green Sukuk. So I think for us, we will continue on this path. I think as has been mentioned today, things like green Sukuk, for example, can be, perhaps this is mostly focused on energy investments to date, and this is very needed, but this can also expand into nature and other spaces where it's less current at the moment. But I think that for us, you know, it's this climate sustainable development nexus that we will really focus on. So again, we look forward to partnering with others on this and really, you know, using the 2030 as something to aim for. Not sort of the longer term, but 2030 actions.
Great. Tan Sri.
1 minute, okay. Think and do taib, which means to transition from action, which I'm sure everybody is doing, to really authentic action and therefore impact. Okay, ni general statement. Within that, of course, there's a hell of a lot of detailing. In particular, I'm keen actually to expand the parts that are working well in all those trillions we talk about. I think the banking market, even the PDS market, is working quite well. I would submit the zakat and wakaf tu, walaupun that shouldn't be a fig leaf on the other thing, is banyak lagi yang boleh buat actually. But in between, we need to think about access, inclusivity, finance for who actually and for what? Because as you know, there is a link. Fakir boleh jadi cafe and all that lah. Tan Sri Daud. I think poor people, they have to take the kayu bakar, kayu ni for, you know, nak masak, and for those in other countries for heat and so on. They don't really think about the long term. They can't. If I were in the same position, I'd probably do the same or even worse. Okay, now, so you need about access. So where does both instruments, and that's where digital banks, etc., we really need to think what I call the pasar malam economy. How are you going to hit? So all of us in all those glass and steel towers, let's go down. Because you need to think about access. You need to think about how to really touch and read. Otherwise, finance for who? Okay? And finally, I want to emphasize about Malaysia Boleh. I really think there's a lot of building blocks. And inshallah, this will be a period of peace, stability. We are blessed with natural resource. A lot of oil, but thank God we're not in OPEC, for example. But not enough to be a curse. So if we can channel that again, like what we have done in '98 during Asian crisis, in the early '90s to build infrastructure, we need to build these building blocks together, which is the last point about collective action. Kena berjemaah. Thank you.
Haniza?
Iza, I think our next iteration is on language and data, because we've had taxonomies coming out, we've got measurements. I think it's how we now turn that into impact. We are looking at the impact part of it, and that's where I say language and data. Definitely coming up with a bit more outcome-based, more collaborative knowledge partners. But yeah, basically it's language and data.
Thanks. Finally, Tan Sri.
As for me, first thing first, we need to identify the pain points which are peculiar to our society. Don't look into the pain point of other state, other country, our own pain point. Number two, we have to identify our own upper hand, our own niche, our own capabilities, which we don't have, that others don't have, and focus on that. The third, which is my own personal hope and wish, don't overburden zakat and wakaf anymore, because I'm the chairman of Majlis Agama Islam, the religious council in Malaysia. I've seen wakaf and zakat has been so overburdened. We have the beneficiaries who are asking for more zakat every month, every day. So we cannot take their money for green and sustainability. They need for their own food, for their own education. So we need to think beyond that. And this is the challenge I'm lucky or unlucky because I sit on the financial sector for the last 25 years. I have been sitting on the Islamic ecosystem for the last 3 years. I've seen the data of both worlds. One is for the elite community, one is for the very poor community in Malaysia. So I have that conclusion. We have to think more positively. Inshallah, there are solutions for that. But we have to change our mind. Don't overcompete, don't overburden the zakat and the wakaf domain of doing sustainability and green. With your permission. Thank you very much.
We are right on the dot at 11 o'clock, so that's all we have time for. Give our hands to the excellent panel today. Thank you very much, everyone.